Hello and welcome to this video on one of humanity's most common parasitic organisms, Toxoplasmosa Gondii. You likely know of ticks, fleas, lice, roundworms, hookworms, leeches and more that effectively parasitize humans. Less well known is Toxoplasmosa Gondii, or as it is colloquially known, brain parasites. Toxoplasmosa Gondii, or as we'll call it from here on, T. gondii, is a protozoa. These are a group of single-celled eukaryotes or organisms, and it means it has more advanced behavior than bacteria or similar. This behavior includes predation and the ability to move. Alongside a rather uncomfortable number of infected humans, T. gondii is famous for its reproductive cycle. By no means is it parthenogenesis that starts a cult, cell division like bacteria or yeast, or is it a virus that requires a host? Instead, the life cycle is what makes it unique. T. gondii can broadly be divided into two components for its reproductive process. There's asexual reproduction, and there is a form of asexual reproduction. It is the sexual reproduction that is unique, particularly because it really only occurs within cats. Well, largely any cat that is known to humans, whether these are wild or domestic. The asexual reproduction can occur in basically any other warm-blooded animal. Let's start the infection cycle with a feline, your standard domestic house cat that's been infected with T. gondii. This can happen any number of ways, but the most common is to consume an infected rodent of some description. The rodent carries the parasite well into the digestive passage of the cat. Eventually, it gets to the small intestine, and here the epithelial cells effectively help to stimulate the cyst or egg full of the parasites, and they undergo their development. This is where they also sexually reproduce, producing millions more zygote-containing cysts. These are also known as oocysts. The epithelial cells, which are involved with these, eventually rupture, and they then release even more of the parasites into the intestinal lumen, that is the space inside the intestine. From here, the cat then releases them in feces by defecation. The oocysts, which are effectively masses of these parasites, are laid into soil, water, food, and anything else that could be contaminated by the feces. The challenge with these is that they are incredibly resilient and can survive in, well, most possible environments that they get exposed to for months. Thankfully for the cat itself, it's only infected for roughly 3 weeks, or up to 3 weeks. So they're not going to continue to spread it after the initial infection. From here, they then find themselves a new host, whether it's, well, most commonly rodents, but it can be any other warm-blooded animal, whether it's a cow, some sort of bird, a human, a dog, anything really. About the only exception to this are your ruminants like cattle and horses. T. gondii then goes on to its next stage of activities, let's say, and that's infection. There are 3 broad stages. The first is your tachyzoid stage, which is when they initially enter the host and they rapidly divide and create more. This is the asexual reproduction. Then the bradyzoid stage, which is when they slow down the division because there are now plenty of them within the host and begin to target and affect local tissues. And then you have the oocyst stage, where they are defecated out, just as with the cat. One of the big problems for the host is that the tissue cysts can basically remain in the host for its lifetime. They are very hard to get rid of. And it's the arguably perpetual presence of these cysts that not only cause the irregular and periodic shedding of the parasite and therefore reintroducing it into the environment, but also the reinfection of the host. This is why, arguably, throughout the host's lifetime, they are able to constantly infect new individuals by virtue of these cysts rupturing and releasing the parasite. It's important for us to point out that the T. gondii requires certain cells to be able to replicate, and that's because during the tachyzoid stage, They are reproducing in vacuoles. These are specialized structures, and they are made from the host cell membrane. So they, very similar to viruses, hijack the cells within the host. It's also very similar in some ways to what malaria does. But malaria targets red blood cells, whereas viruses can target many different kinds of cells. The vacuoles are needed as they persist until eventually the host cell dies and ruptures. That death of the host cell is what releases the tachyzoid version of T. gondii into the bloodstream or into other organs and into feces. This also allows it to spread effectively everywhere throughout the host, including the brain. There are a range of risk factors when it comes to T. gondii, but particularly for humans and other warm-blooded animals. We have things like raw or undercooked meat, so don't eat raw meat, which for most individuals isn't a major concern, but commonly one source of infection is going to be pork, and depending on where you are in the world and the kind of health and safety checks conducted, this could be more significant than others. There's also issues around the water that you're consuming, so given that they can infect water, and if you are consuming water from nature, it's possible that it has been contaminated. But then again, anything raw, like soil, vegetables, fruit, and similar, could also similarly be contaminated. Cat fecal matter is one of the more significant concerns, as it doesn't take much to infect a new host, and is why pregnant women are generally advised not to handle cat litter, because it may inadvertently contain the cysts, or more accurately the oocysts, and infect them. There's also some concerns, although significantly less so now, with blood transfusions and organ transplant. Blood transfusions are generally assessed for their safety well in advance of any transfusion happening, so that shouldn't be a problem. Organ transplants are a slightly different matter, and again, it more relates to whether or not the donor or organ donor, if they're deceased, is someone who carries this. One of the other concerns is milk, well, more accurately, unpasteurized milk. Pasteurization itself will make it safe, but unpasteurized milk, and notably those from goats, are a problem, as it can carry it. There is some evidence that if a mother is infected, they can indeed pass it on either through breastfeeding or as a problem related to the movement of T. gondii through the placenta and eventually into the developing fetus. There's also some arguments to be made that, well, sewage and bivalve shellfish could also be contaminated. The bivalve shellfish are things like mussels, clams, and similar. This is one of the reasons why T. gondii is considered particularly nasty. There are many different ways it can spread other than direct exposure. This is one reason why California, or at least California beaches, should be avoided. It's thought that the seawater around there is contaminated by T. gondii, largely from cat feces, and that it gets into the ocean by bypassing sewage treatment. To some extent, at least in humans, T. gondii can be treated with a combination of drugs. This is largely intended to mitigate the side effects or symptoms of infection rather than removing it, as removing it is incredibly difficult. It's why immunocompromised individuals who get infected by it don't have any choice but to be continuously treated to effectively suppress the infection, as there's no way to stop it. This involves uses of promethazine, sulfasalazine, and folinic acid. The American studies into this have found that at least 40 million, if not more, people in the United States of America could be infected with T. gondii, and because it persists for so long and effectively isn't removed from humans, it could be a lifetime infection, leading to more people becoming infected, and this creates something of a cascade. For the most part, no one would be aware of their infection with T. gondii, as it is largely asymptomatic. This means that you might develop mild flu-like symptoms for a few weeks, but after that, you have no real reason to think you're still sick with anything, let alone a parasite, and this is something the CDC warns of. For pregnant women, however, infants, and for those who have a weakened immune system, the symptoms can be more significant and lead to long-term damage. Because of the way it spreads and the fact that there are certain places in the body that are more prone to infection than others, the brain, eyes, and other organs get damaged first, leading to issues. What has made T. gondii, let's say, nefarious is its reproductive cycle, as we mentioned. The fact is, it relies on cats, then some sort of intermediary host picking up its feces or interacting with it, getting infected, and then defecating that out, leading to the cycle repeating. The first time this, let's say, cycle was identified was when looking at rodents who were infected with T. gondii. What they found was that there was a change in the fear the rodents exhibited towards cats, and this meant that the cats could then more easily predate on the rodents. Basically, it's like people not being worried about predators and then winding up becoming the predator's meal. This led to research into it and experiments. The experiments found that those same rodents also had a strange preference for the odor of cats' urea, and this meant that they would actively put themselves in areas where they were in greater harm or risk of harm, leading to them being more likely to be eaten, and the parasite would therefore be able to continue its life cycle. This is why T. gondii is a somewhat nefarious and notorious parasite. No one knows they have it for the most part. There is no real effect for just about all the population, largely speaking, and finally, no one knows why it has adapted to such a broad range of hosts, but that it's so well adapted to all of them because it can use the same underlying mechanisms to keep the species going. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.